Hello, writers, and welcome to Writing for Screens. This week's episode, writing my novel, number 17, Process Over Plan. My name is Glenn Gers. I am the Chief Operating Everything of Writing for Screens, a channel in which I am trying to take some of the skills and tools and insights that I gained in a 25-year career writing for TV and movies, trying to put those into some form that might be helpful to you. That means a whole bunch of scattered lessons, no system, no plan, no formula, just a bunch of things for you to think about and try out for yourself, because every writer has to make their own path. Every writer has to figure out what kind of work they want to do, what kind of work they're good at, how they are going to work, what kind of work can support them, or where they can get their work seen. All of those things are different for every artist, and you've got to figure out your particular version. So I can't tell you what to do. All I can do is try to show you some things that you can use to figure it out for yourself. In order to do that, here is a screen grab of my main channel page at the moment. If you look down towards the bottom of it, you will see a whole bunch of playlists. The first three of those, here's a close-up. The first three are Screenwriting Essentials, Screenwriting Tools, Skills, and Craft, and the process, being a writer. Those are the three main sections, and in those are about 50 10-minute videos. Each one of those videos is on a certain topic. The topic is in the title and on the great big thumbnail in nice bright colors. Thinking in scenes, genre, flashback, dialogue, character, whatever it is that I've had to work my way through, I tried to get those ideas into a simple form and put them in 10-minute videos. Then, if you've watched all of those, and I beg you, watch all of those. That is where the juicy stuff is. That is the gold, the goods, the grail. That's everything I have to offer in 10-minute sections that you can get to 24/7 for free. So please look at those. When you're done with that, here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, if I can make it, I come and talk on about a different topic. Lately, I've been talking a lot about the process of learning to write a novel, having been a screenwriter for 30 years. So that's what we're going to do today. But first, I'm going to say some hellos, and then we'll get into it. Hello, Sonia. You are welcome. I hope all is well. Hi, Michael. Hello, TT and Donna and Diane. Nice to meet you, Diane. I don't believe we've ever met. Hello, Doreen and chat. Meaning Bites, hello, hello. Wolf Powers is here, and Ricky Normandin and Nishaj. Okay, we got a bunch of people here. This is very exciting. Let's get down to it, because what I've been doing the past couple of weeks, I took last week off. The past couple of weeks, I have been working on my novel and discovering a lot of stuff about my writing process, which I am here to share with you in this hour. The first thing I want to talk about is this concept of process over plan, because I am halfway through the step I'm taking currently, which is I'm going through every scene of my manuscript and just, first of all, cleaning it up, because it's a mess. There's just like repetitive sentences and contradictory paragraphs. I was just throwing down rough stuff. So as I'm going through, I am trying to clean up each section. And with each little chapter, section, whatever you want to call them, I'm trying to write down a single sentence or phrase that says, this is what this particular step of the story is about. That's what this scene is about. And that's okay. That's good. I know what I'm discovering is very often it's about too many things, and I have to narrow it down to one, to say, what am I trying to take the audience through in this one bit of the mosaic? More and more, as I'm doing it, it's becoming very clear that I have got what it's about in my head, but I don't know how to write it. I'm just, somebody who's been a professional writer for 30 years, I don't know how to write this because it's in a different artistic form than I have trained myself to be in. But what's rather exciting about this entire hour is going to be about things I'm discovering, I am doing wrong or who don't know how to do, and how exciting that can be. Okay. And the reason is because I've talked about this before. I know that I am learning to walk. As I've said, walking, talking, anything, whatever you want to do in life, it's actually very complicated. Like walking is actually an enormously complicated series of, you're using like 500 different bones and muscles. You have to learn to swing your body and balance and all this stuff, which we all most of us take for granted. But if you watch a kid trying to learn how to do that, you watch a toddler learning how to try and not to fall over when they take a step, you'll recognize that while you may say, oh, I want to go over there, which is how I write, I was like, ooh, I have an idea for this thing. I think I know what it would be like. I just have to walk over there. The walking part, I need to actually slow down and learn as I walk how to get myself over there. That is a legitimate destination, but I can't just assume I can walk right over there. I have to discover it by walking each step. Oh my gosh, I have to step up here. Oh, I have to walk on a rug. Whatever it is, I am learning the method by which I get there, as well as solving the artistic problems. That is intimidating. I remember doing that the first times I wrote scripts, the first time I wrote a novel back in the late 1980s, early 1990s, which I'm very proud of and hope to self-publish one day. But I remember distinctly discovering that I did not know how to do it and that it took sometimes years to learn how to do these things by doing it repeatedly. I had to write script after script before I could really say, I know how to write a script. So what I've gotten to now is the reason that this is not devastating but exciting is like, oh, I see what the problem is. The problem is not the destination. Like I've said, I want to go over to that chair. The chair is not the problem. The chair is fine. The chair will work when I get to it. When I sit in the chair, it will look and feel just like I want it to. The problem is I have to learn how to put that chair together. I have to learn how to get over there. But when you're stumbling, you think, oh my God, the chair is a mistake. It's not the chair, it's the learning to walk. And that's really the most important thing I came here to say. How do you create and make choices when you don't have experience? Because most of the people who are watching this, you guys don't have experience. You haven't done this 20, 30 times. Process over plan. That is what I am here to talk about. The thing that I feel more and more confident about is I know I don't know how to write this, but I know that if I follow the process, I will figure it out. I have to learn like, okay, literally one step at a time, one chapter. And my chapters are very, very short. So therefore, just one chapter, which is just like a page or two. I have to figure out how to solve that one. But if I keep doing that, if I keep doing the process, in this case, my process at the moment is really figuring out what exactly the scene is trying to convey. What not just the plot, but what emotional step, what feeling, what new color or texture am I bringing to the story with this step, this tile in the mosaic. That's what I am doing right now. When I get done with that, the next part of the process is going to be to go through these and one by one, arduously, figure out how to make that goal that say, okay, I want this to have the texture of sadness and rainy days and the discovery that you are not making headway with the one you love. That's what this scene is about. How do I get that into the words of this particular event, this particular action? Craft it. Because it has to flow from the last and flow into the next and keep the story going and build the feelings. When I'm done with that, I will then go in and polish the language and polish the research. Because there's a lot of things where I'm like, ooh, I want to talk about winter in New York and summer in New York in the 1930s. I have to choose one scene where I'm like, okay, grabbing the summeriness of this or grabbing the winter, the stages of winter. or the parts of art history that I want to talk about. So those are steps down the line. I can't get to those steps. I can't worry about how to blend the research into the scene until the scene is really solid itself. So I have to say, I'm not going to worry about the research right now. I'm going to worry when I sit down to work about one scene at a time. So that is where I am. Process over plan. I do not know how I am going to solve these things, but I do know if I take them one bite at a time, one step at a time, I can solve them. The other reason that I feel so confident that I can solve it is because of all the things I am discovering I have done wrong. And so that's what I want to talk to you about here. I'm going to list some things I have been doing wrong, partly just because I'm sure it's fun to hear someone say, I'm trying to do professional level work, but I'm messing up, and that's part of the game. But also because you have to learn to be excited when you see that you are saying that's not working. Because the one good thing about having done something and seeing that it's not working is that it opens the question, well, if this one doesn't work, what would work? So instead of beating your head against this wall of this thing that isn't working, which is what I think most of us do often, it's like, I got to make it work. I got to make it work. Oh, that's not going to work. Therefore, something else might. Maybe it's the opposite. Maybe it's a variation. Whatever it is, each will be different. But you can't even begin to figure out what is going to work until you admit that the thing you are stubbornly persisting with is not working. So let's talk about some of the things that are not working for me as I'm going through this scene by scene, cleaning it up, identifying what the point is. One of the things I'm discovering is there are things that are working. The structure is good. I'm getting to the point where the story itself is pretty solid. There's a series of steps that the characters are taking in a direction, and then there are various obstacles and reverses and revelations all the way through. And that structure is beginning to feel solid to me. But it's also feeling, as I read it, boring. And I'm like, how can it be that my structure is right, my actions are right, all the things I teach in screenwriting, and yet it's just, I'm bored. I'm bored reading this. It doesn't work. And the reason is that a big part of this is simply screenwriting versus novel writing. This novel is particularly interior. It is about the feelings of this character and the people he's involved with as he goes through this journey. One, learning about love, learning what love is, and learning about what it means to be an artist. Those are the two main things he's going to learn in the course of this story. And those are like what it means to be an artist. I mean, yeah, you can say like, oh, you learn perspective or something, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about being creative. I mean, I'm not a painter. I'm not a visual artist. And I chose that because I wanted to talk about something that's very personal to me, but in a form that isn't quite, oh, he's a writer. I've done that, by the way. My last novel was about a writer. The main thing is that when you are writing something that is interior, for the screen, there are certain things you have to learn to do to exterior it. But in a novel, what you need to do is use your language to create this interior story, an interior story, not a story of action at all, a story of feelings and discoveries and changes. That's what I want. That's the reason I want to do this novel, because it's like, ooh, it's about it's a new set of challenges. But the problem is the language I have trained myself in is the language of describing actions very, very simply. That's the best thing a screenwriter can do, is to get the act clear and simple, and active, emotionally active. But when I say act, I mean dialogue as well. But when you're writing in a novel, especially a first-person novel, the voice of the narrator and the ways that things are described and the ways that they are unfolding is how the action happens. Just mind-blowingly different. But what I have to learn is what I have done mostly in trying to get this story down is just to write the simple action, to say like, I went out to the taxi cab. She was waiting there. I got into the cab. I was very nervous and I said this, she said that. That's how a script works. And it works for a script because there's going to be all these extra layers of language, the language of framing and cutting, the language of acting, the language of production design. Those are all going to add in the things that make the scene come alive. I have to learn to forget those things and work in the words. So that's the first thing, is just becoming aware. Okay, I'm going to have to go through every single scene and say, like, how do I do this? And like, I'm just talking about that scene where there's a scene about midway through the novel where the main character has not seen the woman he has got a huge crush on for almost a full year. And then she returns to the city that he's been waiting in. And he goes to see her. And she's waiting in a taxi cab. And he comes out of this restaurant and sees her there and walks over and gets into the cab. And they talk a little on the way to where they're going. There are so many ways to write that. There's only, honestly, in screenwriting, there's only a handful. I mean, really what you want to say is like, the taxi cab's across the street. It's raining heavily or it's raining lightly. You know, it's just something very simple and then just get to it. But how there is a boring fictional way to write that, but I'm conscious that that's not going to work. I need to figure out like what is the perception that he has of that moment. Is he talking about how it feels to him to walk? Is he talking about what he is perceiving as he comes close? Is he thinking about what he's going to say? I mean, you can't say everything. So you have to choose, make a choice. And what I've been doing in this past week or two is saying, oh, I'm going to have to make that choice. I can't make it right now, but at least I know I have to define the action for myself. And then I have to define how is he going to present it to us in his voice. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is about ideas. In any project, I always have ideas I want to get in. For instance, in this story, I'm trying to get a lot of ideas about art and this particular moment of art in which abstract art had been splintered into a bunch of different theories. There was surrealism. There was what's called pure abstraction. Each one of these is an interesting concept. Now, interesting concepts are not usually the stuff of a great story. Like the concept of pure abstraction painting, but I have to figure out how this character interacts with it. What I have done in the past is usually I try and find a person for whom these ideas, like they are enacting or speaking for the ideas. What I have done here is I chose different characters who would speak these points of view. Because in a movie, that's what you need to do. You need somebody to say this idea if it's going to get into the movie. But in a novel, that's not how it works. So I've got to think back over, okay, like I got this person who says this thing, but what's the main character's relation to them? What does that idea matter to them? Not just, oh, this person is going to get a chance to make this little speech where they say, I think art should be pretty. Because that's one of the ideas. One of the characters say, why can't painting just be pretty? We want art to make our life pretty. And that's a valid choice. That's a valid argument. But I gave it to a character he runs into once and almost never talks to again. And I'm like, oh, no. I got to figure out a way to make that matter to him as a thing he's wrestling with in some way. Could be a person he's wrestling with. Anyway, my main point is you can't just get an idea into the story. It has to become a part of the story. You can't just drop it into a story, like make a space for it and drop it in. And if you're like me, I always have these ideas, like I want this idea in. And what I'm realizing is that's only the first step, is knowing what the idea is and that you want it in. The next step, and by the way, I see you guys, I see all your comments. I want to try and get through my agenda first, and then I will get into them. Okay. So the second thing I've realized is one of the things I did 10 or more years ago, I wrote a rough draft of the beginning of the book in which I got a voice, a narrator's voice. It was kind of folksy and plain spoken and casual. And that fit this character and the world I was trying to portray. But as I'm going through the story, I'm realizing that voice doesn't fit much of the story. It fits the beginning of the story, which is where I wrote it for. But it's not working for the rest of the story. And what I realized in these past 2 weeks is the voice is going to have to change. It's going to have to develop and grow. And there's that original voice has to stay there, but it has to add layers as he adds layers of experience. In other words, he starts out as this teenage hobo in the Depression who's sort of drifting through America, very outside of society, self-educated and smart, but very limited. As the story goes on, he's going to learn about all these different types of life that he gets involved in his journey. Each one of those has to add a layer of language, of ability for him to think in certain ways. And that will also sort of feed into the whole thing because he's narrating the whole thing from his grown self. But I've recognized that one of the things that's been holding me up is that the voice I have for the beginning doesn't work once he gets involved with the other characters. It was a good introductory voice, but he's got to get more artsy. He's got to get more sophisticated and poetic and emotionally complex as he goes along. I don't know exactly how to do that. I mean, I've seen in other books things where I thought, oh, that's that kind of shape of a sentence in a paragraph. That's what I'm going to do. So I know that it's doable, but I'm going to have to learn it as I go. I cannot, once again, it's process over plan. I can't possibly know in advance how I'm going to do that. I have to wait until I'm in that scene and figure out the tools that hopefully later as a writer I'll get very familiar with. I'll be walking, but right now I'm going to have to figure out how to move my legs for each step. I'm going to have to figure out how does the language work for this moment. And I can only do that in the moment, which is the next thing I want to get to, which is the concept of a wrong process I've been following, which is I've just been kind of not wanting to look at the text until I know what I'm doing with it, because it's bad, okay? It's not working. And so I keep kind of wanting to skim it or avoid it or say like, oh, I better figure out how I'm going to fix it and then I'll look at it. But I can't, that doesn't work. You have to actually get in it. You have to be looking at it and reading it over and over and tinkering with it, working inside it to figure out how to fix it. The way I wanted to phrase that for you is, as much as it feels like you want to avoid reading it or you want to avoid writing it if you don't feel like you know what you're doing, the magic doesn't happen until hands are on, till you're actually, you get your hands dirty, you're holding the material, you're working with the words, you're figuring out the scene. Until you are actually doing it, no matter how much theory and plan you have, it's not going to happen. You're not going to get anywhere. And I'm saying this to you like it's you, but this is something I'm saying to myself that I'm hoping when I share it, it's useful to you. A couple of other minor points. These are very personal to me. I don't know if they will relate to you, but I wanted to tell you because these are the things. As I'm writing, when I hit a stumbling block and get past it, I go, ooh, and I make a note in a little file, which is live stream notes, to say, like, these are things I should talk about. So sometime in the past couple of weeks, I realized that because this is a historical novel, it's set in the 1930s, which I did not live through, I am very hung up on capturing the reality. I've talked about this before, but a very clear, simple one was there's a bunch of scenes take place in a hotel in New York, a fancy hotel, fairly fancy hotel. Now, there are many fancy hotels in New York that were there in the 1930s that I could research and describe. I've been sort of hung up on that. Like, oh, did they have this? Did they have? And I've realized I have to stop worrying about that. I have to allow myself the freedom to make stuff up, even though I know it will be terribly obvious to anyone who knows New York City that there was no such hotel as the whatever I'm going to make up. I'm going to make up a hotel instead of using the St. Regis or the Plaza or any of the hotels that I know are there. I've been inside some of these, and they were there in the 30s. But worrying about whether or not I'm getting their lighting fixtures right is messing with my ability to figure out what is those few words, because there's just going to be a few descriptions that relate to our character in the moment. And that's what's important. So I need to make up that experience to say, you know, the hotel was lit by candles in the bar. I don't know, whatever was going to work for the scene, that it's okay. It's a worthwhile price to pay, in this case, to not get the description of the St. Regis Hotel correct, but to make it come alive in the story and on the page. So I'd be, at least at the moment, liberated by making it up instead of researching. Later I can research, but right now I have to allow myself the liberation of just making stuff up. The other thing I've noticed about me, and this is very much about me, but you never know if it'll help you. As I said, this story, although it is about painters in the 1930s, neither of which I am, it's very personal to me. I do best, I like to write when I find something personal, even if it's not externally like me. I wrote a movie about two women with eating disorders, with the opposite eating disorders, who become friends. Now, I'm not a woman and I don't have an eating disorder, but I could find in myself emotional resonances to these very, very different things. And I researched about eating disorders and things like that, but I eventually found my way through because I was talking about things that mattered to me. In this novel, the idea of being creative, I'm choosing to make it painting because I think it'll be cool to discover it, and because I've always had a love for painting in my life, but I don't personally do it, is I can find the personal story and then put it on in a pleasant mask. Here's the thing. One of the three main characters is a painter who's very, very, very talented, but feels a conflict between being all or nothing in his painting or having a relationship with this woman he's in love with. And he personally feels that possibly the relationship will cut into his ability to be creative. Now, that is not necessarily true. It's not like, but it is true that people feel that. I have felt that feeling of maybe I need to push people away in order to make space for myself to be creative. That is an ongoing battle in life for me, for many creative people, of how can I balance life and creativity? Because it feels like they're each taking away from each other. Obviously, they could be feeding into each other, or you could balance them. Interestingly, the TV series The Bear, season 3, which is controversial and some people hate it, but I liked it partly because the main character, Carmi, is going through this exact problem. So I had a lot more tolerance for that season than most people, because I was like, oh, that's interesting. I get it, Carby. I understand how you feel like maybe you can't deal with your life because you're trying to solve a creative problem. Anyway, the point is, I was in this story afraid to make the problem plain. Like I had this character, and he's a painter, and he won't commit to his relationship because he says it's about money. He's poor, she's rich. He feels uncomfortable about that, so he's like, wait till I catch up a little financially. But that's not what it's really about. And I was afraid to make it clear that he was actually pushing her away because he was afraid of encroaching on his creative space. And I realized that this story is never going to work unless I make that plain. Now, is that personally risky? Kinda, not really. Most people aren't going to say, "Oh, you think a bad thing." By the way, the point of this story is that one of the things is this character learns he didn't have to push her away. But the main thing is, for me, this story will only work if I admit the personal feeling driving these characters and let it be in the story embarrassingly clearly. Even though it won't be embarrassing because I'm not a painter in the 30s, to me it was scary enough that I was hedging on it. I was giving him other excuses and things. Okay, so those are some of the things that each one of them I'm like, oh, I am stuck, or I have not caught this, I don't know where to go with this next, getting these words, because, and each one of these are things that's like, oh, I've been going in the wrong direction on that. I'm not trying to do the wrong thing. I've been trying to get there the wrong way. And only by saying, oh, I have to be more personal. I have to be less attentive to research. I have to be more willing to figure out the voice as I write it. Those discoveries, which are all sort of together, they actually are making me feel like, oh, I can do this. It's going to take a long time. It is hard, but at least I know that I can do it. At least I know that if I keep working through these things, I know what I'm trying to get to, and I know that it's, to me, worth getting to. So that's the lesson of the day. Now I will get to your many, many comments. Hello. Okay. Hi, Joni. Nice to see you. Michael says, writing is experimental. I found out too much how-to is following a recipe. Exactly. We are saying very much the same thing. I'm not following anybody's particular how-to. I was following the how-to I thought was in my head. That's the tricky thing. Is sometimes you're like, oh, that system doesn't work. But worse is, oh, I think I know what this should be like, and I have to write it to be like that. Instead of saying, I have to look at these words and figure out how they're not working. That's my how-to. That's my formula. The formula is, I felt like I had to wait until I had a plan to fix the problem. What I'm realizing is I will never have a plan. I don't know what I'm doing. So therefore, I need a process more than a plan. And my process is going to be learn to look at the language scene by scene. That's my process at the moment. Okay. Hi, Hasko, not the pirate. Okay. Donna says, I love that you're exploring and sharing this, Glenn. Thanks. You're welcome. With infinite options, it can be overwhelming, especially if you like lots of different styles and are prone to experiment. How to be consistent. Yes, this is another problem with me. I personally, not only do I like a lot of different styles, I like to bring contrasting styles into one thing. That's my problem, but it's also my gift. If I get it right, it's really cool. And I have gotten it right enough times to feel like in various things that I know it's worth doing. But yes, my problem is I don't have a simple plan. I don't have I'll just write this in like a hard-boiled style, which I can rip off from Raymond Chandler, and that'll be fine. Instead, I'm like, I kind of want it to be a little like Raymond Chandler, but I also really want it to be like James Joyce. And that's where you run into the problem. Okay. So the question of how to be consistent, I don't believe I have to be consistent in the sense of my career. The question is how to be consistent within the work. And that's why I've been talking so much about this narrator's voice, because I know that he is self-educated, and I know that he has gone through a series of experiences in a certain time period, a milieu. So therefore, I know that he was reading certain things and has certain ideas in his head. So I have to find a language. And what I've been doing is reading books in various voices. Ernest Hemingway, Henry Miller, Graham Greene, people, E.L. Doctorow, like I've said, people whose first-person novels worked for me in this voice as part of the voice. And I'm saying, well, he could have read this, he could have read this, and that's how I'm going to try and be consistent in the story. Whether or not that will be consistent to my next story, who knows? Not worrying about it. Ricky says, I've joined my local writing group to get feedback on my novel and to do the same for others. And these guys are tough. I guess it's exciting, like being a rabbit about to be eaten by wolves exciting. Yeah, here's what I would say. If the tough is positive, in other words, somebody who says, that sucks, that's not helpful. That sucks because the sentences are redundant or too long, or that sucks because you keep changing from first person to third person, or that sucks because you don't change from first person, whatever it is, then you can survive that. But if it's just, this is bad or you are bad, that's not tough, that's mean. So what I can say is, if these are people who are like really asking questions, and some of those questions are going to be, it's a concern of like, they might say to you, is that historically accurate? And you might have to say, I decided I'm not worrying about that. I'm decided the number of people who knew what the doorknobs are like in the St. Regis Hotel are minimal enough that I can get that wrong. Anyway, good, Ricky. I am happy that you have, as long as they are being tough but creative and helpful, that's great. Hi, Jean, ward number 6. Good to see you. Hasko says, revealing the interior without being boring. I guess that's what they call finding one's voice. Yes, exactly. And the tricky thing here is I'm not finding my voice. I'm finding the book's voice. But that's good, because if I was responsible to find my voice, it would add all extra pressure. All I have to do is find Tom's voice, this character who's writing the story. And I'm finding it. I'm finding it partly by, honestly, by looking at other things. Like I said, I'm reading a lot. Here, you can see my part of my reference bookshelf there is getting bigger as I'm throwing more books on there. A lot of those are art history reference, but some of them are things like Thomas Wolfe, John Dos Passos, different writers from that period that this character would have read. And I'm looking at them and I'm saying, like, how does he do it? I'm also, like, I was reading Great Expectations by Dickens, first person narrator, to see. Now, there's certain sections, like, I'm not going to do it. That's way Dickensy. These long descriptions of funny local characters, although I'm going to do a little bit of that. But there are certain sections where it's like he's describing what it was like for the character to be walking out on the marshes in his little hometown and feeling frightened. And I'm like, how exactly in 4 or 5 sentences does Dickens give me that moment? Because I've got to recognize that that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have to say, what's it like to be in a New York coffee shop, waiting for someone to show up? That specificity of how the narrator captures something. I'm studying work that I think is interesting, and also that in this case that the writer who I'm ventriloquizing could have read. Okay. Describing the creative process is difficult. Scorsese had the artist paint using music. In Mishima, Schrader shot 2 of his short stories. Yes, yeah, absolutely. The tricky thing for me is I know all of those filmic ways to do it. What I'm enjoying and scared by, or in over my head by, is how to do it without the camera, without the production design, without the acting. That's the the challenge for me. Dialectics Junkie says, I feel like when people say concept, they can mean very different things. I would agree that concept as premise is not important for the quality of the story, but concept as something more complex is very important to a good story. I'm not saying I don't have a concept. What I'm saying is, if I have an idea, a concept of, in looking at this story, one of the big questions is, why on earth do people do something as essentially silly as painting, creative painting? What is that? What's the point? Why would you think it's important? Which at the moment in the 1930s, these people were debating the importance of their painting. And so one of the things I want to do is get the different arguments. Like, there are certain people who argue that painting should be socially productive, that it should steer us towards certain social concepts like solidarity with workers or whatever. Other people are saying, as I have this character who's saying, painting beautifies our life and that it shouldn't have to do more than that. It should, in fact, only do that. So what I'm saying is, I want that idea in there. I want the reader to be thinking, what about painting? Should it be productive or should it be pretty? And that's what I'm talking about. Is I've got the ideas. I know that I want to say it. I can say it to you as a debate, but how do I get into the story? And obviously, the one way you get into the story, in a script especially, is you have a character who is actively fighting for, arguing for, taking actions for a point, an idea, a vision. I can do that in the novel too, but that takes a lot of space. And one of the other things is that my main character can just think about those things. So it's tricky. It's just a tricky new element. I know how to, like I said, I know how to do it in scripts. I don't entirely know. There's, as Donna just said, when you have I know that there's so many ways to get these ideas in, that I am just having to stop and go, ooh, I have 30 ways to do this, but I have to choose one. That's the hard part. Saying, I'm going to commit to this one and then make it work the way it works. That's the game. Train to train. Yes. Or bird by bird. Different trains, scenes, ideas, and memories and experiences. The backdrops should mirror the plot's themes or emotions. Could. Yes, exactly. I definitely, when I say I don't know how to do it, I don't mean I don't know the possibilities. I was an English major in 40 years ago. I have been reading and studying and I know way too much theory about how to do this. What I don't know is how I'm going to do it in this story. I don't know how to do it. I know what I could do. But like I said, I know 40 different ways to do it. And my problem is, while I am really smart about this stuff and can analyze it and talk about it to death, making the creative choice to do it one way, because you only can do it one way per project, per moment, per scene, that's where I'm a beginner. And I'm a beginner in this work. I mean, I've done it in other works, but for this particular work, how it's going to work, how I'm going to do it, admitting that I don't know which choice to make. Not that there's a choice out there that I don't know that will solve everything. I know the choices. I don't know which one I should make. And believing that there's an external answer, that there's a choice out there that will just be so obviously right that it solves your problem can kill you artistically. Because the truth is, you have to make a painful, scary choice. You have to say, I'm going to try having him talk this way in this scene. I'm going to try having him over-describe or under-describe. I'm going to try that. I'm going to commit to doing that. That's the scariest, hardest thing that I know of creatively. And it happens all the time in different ways. And I'm learning to say, I don't have to find the right answer. I have to choose the right answer and make it work. That's what I'm trying to convey. Okay. That is so true, Glenn. You have to write in order to see the magic. Get it on the page. Yes. That is the other thing, is that I can talk a million years about this moment when somebody talks about beauty in painting. I have to write the words in sentences, because the thing is, you can get it down to like 2 sentences. I think painting should be pretty. Boom, done. And that, to a certain extent, is what I have done so far. Now I have to put it into the voices of the characters or the moment. That's where I am. Okay, Hasko, the pirate, not the pirate, says, I'm amazed when, in a movie, you see the actor realize something. I can imagine the script saying, character A realizes XYZ. Yes, exactly. It is really a collaborative effort of many arts that a novel doesn't have. Yes, this is the tricky thing, is that what I have to do, what I get to do, is to say, my character, because he's first person, has to say, I realized. For instance, one of the things he does is, at a certain point, for the first time in his life, because he's been a drifter his whole life, once he gets involved in this story, he gets an apartment and a job. It's like, I realized I don't know what people do who have a job. It's like, I don't know how to do that. So I have to have that moment where he says, I realized that. But I have to put it in a language that entertains and also doesn't stop the story dead. Realizing can stop things dead. The whole point about realizing in a story is it's got to open up the path of what's happening, which is different from just, oh, there's a thought, there's a realization, boom, I can close the book now, I had the realization. But the realization has to lead to, what is he going to do, and how is that going to affect whether or not he finds ways to love this woman? Okay. Diane says, the multi-layered lacquering was a very big deal back then. This could, yes, yeah. No, that's a whole other element, is talking about the painting techniques. Definitely going to be part of that. Ricky says, your own impressions of the New York City hotels you've been in are the raw material to create an impressionist word painting of a hotel. More immersive than describing architectural details. Yes, exactly. Except not only the hotels I've been in, the hotels I've seen in movies or read about in books. Because like there's a hotel in Barton Fink, which has a very powerful vibe. There's hotels in a lot of things. And those are all in my hotel bank. Exactly. And I've got to figure out, I got to put myself in that feeling and choose the vibe, choose the senses and the mental revelations that happen as he experiences it. Diane says, I feel like we are discussing the essence of life. Are we getting to the heart of things? Yes, that is hopefully what we are discussing. That is exactly the job as far as I'm concerned. Wolf Powers says, my first novel bored me. The one I'm working on now is fun and exciting to me. Thinking in scenes has helped me get into the characters. So what moves the story is more than just a series of events. Yes, thank you, Wolf. This is true. One of the things that's tricky about narrative, about writing, is how many elements have to work together. You can't just describe things. You can't just have action. Often they'll say, oh, put it in dialogue, have the characters talk about it. That makes it more interesting. Not necessarily, but you do need to have the dialogue. So there's a lot of tools available. And one of the most important choices a good writer makes is to understand that and to figure out which one, thinking in scenes, also thinking in terms of the language itself, but also what the language is expressing of the feelings of the people. Because you can't just say this happened. Well, that's not true. I have read books which said this happened, this happened, this happened. And there was a propulsion to it that did work. So you can do it. Not the kind of writing I feel like doing right now. But as such, I'm setting myself the challenge of capturing things in words. Okay. Donna says that concept of shoulding on ourselves or others is a long philosophical discussion, or in short, just don't do it especially as artists. Yeah, definitely should. Whenever you think like this should do this, a little red flag should go up. Should that, or is that just something I am imposing? Sometimes you do like, this should do it. I see that. This should be more exciting. This should be slower. This should be more of a punch at the end. These are like craft things, but you have to remember that should has to come from you, not from an external source. Okay. A friend told me if you look at the geometry of Middle Eastern art, you can evoke self-hypnosis. Yes, indeed, there are all sorts of things about art that are fascinating. There's a part of me that just wants to write art history here, and that's tricky. Doreen, do you have an inciting incident, midpoint, climax, or are you deciding how to plot in your own original way? I am definitely not using screenplay form. However, I do have one thing I have managed to do in the past year since I started reworking this is I have an absolute story, step-by-step outline of the events and how they are propelling the main, my 6 questions. What does the main character want? Which is to be in requited love with this woman who is in love with another man. I have all those things structured out. I've solved that. If this was a movie, I know how to write it. What I'm discovering now is I don't know how to write the language of the book. So the answer is I am doing it my own way because I feel like the rhythms of a book are different than the rhythm. I know can be different. You can write a book in screenplay structure and sort of hide it in there, and it'll work great. But for me, this happens to have a 4-act structure, actually 9-act structure, but there's 4 main acts. But the 4 each have their own vibe. Like in the first one, there's a coming together of the love triangle. In the second one portion of the triangle leaves, so there's just 2 of them left. Then in the third one, the one who left came back. And the one who was there before gets kind of excluded, and then the third, another one leaves. So each of the 4 sections has its own vibe that's pushing. It's like a little mini story within the larger story of this love triangle. That's the structure. Okay, so Mark Burton says, "Dear Glenn, today I had a panic attack. Oh my gosh, at the doctor's surgery, I felt, no. Men do have these. Are you kidding? People have panic attacks all the time. And yes, use it with a character. Good. Truly, do not feel, the one great thing I will say is that, and I would avoid most social media, but there for solutions to psychological problems. I would say be very careful about that. But there are so many books and essays, articles online where you can learn about things like anxiety and panic attacks. I would also urge you, I haven't seen it yet, but I heard from someone who I trust greatly that Inside Out 2, you should see Inside Out 1 first so you get the premise of the world, but Inside Out 2 deals specifically with anxiety and panic. And so please go to that movie, also because it was written by a friend of mine. But I've heard that Inside Out 2 is actually a really good therapy session for questions about anxiety. So I urge you to go to that. how much of yourself are you putting into the main character? I am putting a great deal of myself into two of the characters. The narrator has some of me, but Charlie the painter, who's actually not the main character, Charlie the painter is in some ways me, but in other ways not. The answer is, it's not so much that I'm saying this is me. I'm saying this thing that he feels is me. Just like, all right, with Disfigured, the movie I wrote about women and weight, about eating disorders, and whether or not there were things about what I knew about eating disorders that I could relate to, even though I don't have those, but certain feelings of fear or control or compulsion, certain feelings of giving yourself comfort by doing something that's not good for you. These are feelings that I think we all understand, and also a feeling of dissociation from your physical or social self. That was a big driver for me of my understanding of these people. But on the other hand, would you say, did I put myself in them? Nah. I mean, I guess I put myself in them literally. Like I said, what would it feel like to be them? And because I know that feeling. And so it's a mixture of sort of method acting where I'm saying, what would it feel like to be refusing myself nourishment? Or what would it feel like to be feeling like my body is bigger and less reflective of me than I want? And I could feel that, even though I don't feel that. I mean, I feel some of that, but you know what I'm saying. Anyway, so what I'm saying is the answer is never, well, not never. In this book, it's not me per se. But on the other hand, Charlie is creatively a lot like me. Charlie keeps changing his plan. So Charlie actually does extraordinary work, but he keeps throwing it aside without finishing it because he's got a new extraordinary thing that he wants. It's like, that's very much me. I have piles and piles of manuscripts that nobody has seen because I was like, oh, no, that's not so good enough. And it's not perfectionism. It's something else. It's an overabundance of creativity and a lack of discipline. Anyway, so the answer is, I'm putting a lot of myself into these people. However, none of them are me, if that makes sense. Good. Yeah, Mark, take it easy. Get some books, get some self-help books. There are tons of them, and they're really helpful. Okay, non-writing question. What's your outlook for this Paramount Skydance deal? Give me a second on that, because that'll be our closing bit. Disfigured is on Prime. Thank you very much, Gene. For those of you who want to see the movie that I made, Disfigured, there we go. Disfigured, it's called. And it is on, indeed, it is rentable. It used to be on iTunes. It doesn't look like it is currently. I have to talk to the distributor about that, but it is definitely there. So yes, thank you, Gene. Okay. And yeah, Michael is saying, we have all had panic. Some worse than others, but I know so many people who have these. Don't worry about it. Okay. I'm going to close out with this question about Paramount and Skydance, which is simply this. Do I think Skydance is going to be bad? No, I think Skydance is going to be fine. Of all the companies that was going to take over Paramount, because somebody was going to take it, Ellison and Skydance are likely to do a fairly good job because they are kind of a good blend of tech and respect for Hollywood. Are they the most, are they going to do a lot of movies that are going to get onto the Criterion Collection? Probably not. But that's okay. That's not the business they are in. Are they going to fire a lot of people? Yes. That is going to be happening. Is it going to be like Max? No, I do not believe that Ellison is like Zaslav. I believe that Zaslav is a particular brand of business fool that pisses the hell out of me. I really dislike. Ellison I actually respect. I think he's doing not a bad job. I think Skydance seems sensible. And overall, is the business consolidating, and is that bad? Yes. If it's going to be consolidating, is this a fairly good consolidation? Yeah. So there you go. All right. And with that, I will. All right, hold on. Okay. I'm going to say, I was just making some notes so that I could put things into the description at the end. Time to go. Time to get to work. Time for me to go write something. So you go write something.